The Subaru WRX community is some of probably, I would argue, the most helpful, sometimes toxic, incredible, yet somehow a little bit circle jerky, insanely smart group of people I've ever met in my entire life. If you're a car enthusiast, and at least one point in your car enthusiast journey, you have thought about owning a Subaru. At some point, you had to have. If you don't live in the perfect sunny state of California where it's 75 degrees every single day, a lot of times people are picking up a Subaru WRX because it can do just about anything and everything, and also sometimes nothing, okay? It's one of those things where you will own one and you'll either fall in love with it, you'll own it for the rest of your life, or you'll own one, it'll blow up, and you'll hate them for the rest of your life. There does not seem to be a very good in-between. Like, as I'm talking to you right now, to my right is somebody who owned a Subaru Legacy GT. Guess what happened? It blew up. I'm looking to somebody to my left who also owned a Subaru at one point of its life. Guess what happened? It blew up. So sometimes there's this stigma around the Subaru WRX that it is a common car to quote unquote blow up. And I want to talk a little bit about it in today's episode of 20 minutes of useful car information, because today is all about the Subaru WRX. I'm Alex Martini with 2 underscores on Instagram. Welcome to MartiniWorks. We help people mod their car. We try to make sure that they mod their car the right way. And if you're looking for help on that, you can hit us up, hit our chat bot or like chat bubble thing in the corner. You're talking to Carissa or myself or Hamby. It's absolutely awesome. Plus, we have new products on the website every single day. That includes wheel and tire packages. We can ship them right to your door. Intakes, exhausts, JDM parts that you need to get from Japan. We can do it pretty much all. That's what allows us to continue doing videos like this, and it means the absolute world to have you here. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers, which is super rad, and I couldn't be more thankful for that. So let's jump into this. Fact number one, I think before we even go into the conversation on if the WRX is a good car for you or not good for you, you kind of have to get past all of the stigma, all of the community hype. I'm even guilty of it. I know that if I talk about the WRX on a short and I say that they're unreliable, it's going to do millions of views. I'm sometimes part of the problem, but the point of the matter is like the package of a WRX, it just like can't be understated. Turbo 4-cylinder, all-wheel drive. You got a boxer engine that had a low center of gravity. It's a really cool engine. It's a really cool sounding engine, especially the EJ205. I mean, it's a cool car. It's even in its stock form, I think it's one of the best looking, most aggressive sedans you can buy over the last 20 years. And I say that knowing that the SIs and the Type Rs and the Golf Rs and the Golf GTIs and all those cars exist, the B5 S4 included. I still think the Subaru WRX, even the non-STI, just the WRX, is one of the most aggressive sedans out there just from factory. It's such a cool looking car, and in its own right, it is pretty wild. The success of the WRX, though, didn't necessarily just come from slapping a turbo 4-cylinder and an all-wheel drive system together and just sending it out into the public. It actually was a really smart marketing move made by Subaru in the 90s, almost at the perfect time. You see, this was back in the day when a guy named Ari Vatanen, I definitely butchered that, and Colin McRae really were at their like heyday of rally driving. World Rally had grown tremendously in the 90s. A lot of it came from the fact that the Group B racing was kind of coming to an end. In the 80s, there was a lot of aggressive driving, insane driving, but at the same time, it was some of the most dangerous driving in the world. And so it ended up getting shut down in various forms, which started to make these classes and groups of rally type all across the world start to kind of hemorrhage into very specific groups, very specific championships, which ultimately made the audience and the spectator size for these more niche groups, which used to have 1 billion, now there's 10, grow tremendously. Worldwide, this was across Europe, this was across Asia, and this was across America as well. And Colin McRae was one of those drivers that just seemed to have this sense of style and personality and sauce and creativity that Subaru could really count on to make their introduction of what would be the Impreza in like 1993. The first ever event of the Impreza would debut at the Thousand Lakes Rally in 1993, and Subaru brought home a podium finish. This was really like the start to what would be the recipe for success for Subaru on taking their race car or their rally cars and turning them into production street cars, okay? Because over the next like 5 or so years would be McRae like fine-tuning the car, and then Subaru taking those fine-tunings, turning them into consecutive manufacturing titles from 1995 to 1997, and all of that data, all of that information went into the road car. 1992 was the launch of the WRX. The US did not get it in 1992, but essentially what we got was a very refined sedan. They had 10 years to really dial in what they wanted the car to be, which meant that when it came to the States, it was actually a bang-on car right from the get-go. WRX, I think you know this. If you don't, it means World Rally Experimental. I'm not sure how much of that is true to the 2022 plus version of the WRX, but we'll get into that fact and a little bit of that history later in the video. You can get older ones if you want. Typically, the older ones are tougher to handle. They're a little bit tougher to keep alive. I'm of a personal opinion, you can let me know in the comments below, that I think the GC8 is probably the best looking generation Preza of all time. Now, we can get into WRX, not WRX, STI, non-STI, but I just think the GC8 platform is the best looking Subaru ever. This goes into what I would call the hodgepodge mess, though, that is the Subaru WRX, because it was so successful and they made so many of them over the past, 2-3 decades now, that they kind of hit this recipe of success, which is affordable, competitive, powerful, open to young kids. And when you start to mix all those things together, you get really awesome examples of cars and builds and performance success. And you also get the most disgusting wish app builds and issues that you've ever seen before in your life. The thing with Subaru is it hits such a wide range of folk that it can sometimes be really weird to figure out where do you fall into that, and that's the whole point of MartiniWorks. As you start building your car, how you build it, the WRX might be a perfect platform for you. How you want to build it may not be good for what your budget is, where you live, what you do. And because the Subaru WRX is such a very unique platform, that unless you know kind of what you're getting into, it can either be fantastic or it can be terrible. If you guys want to know more information about our personal thoughts on the Subaru WRX platform, you can actually go check out our podcast. It's called the MartiniWorks Podcast. We film it every single week. It goes live on Fridays on YouTube. It's a video and audio. And if you don't want to do that, you just want to listen to it on Spotify or Apple Music, Podcast, RSS, whatever it is, you can actually do that as well. Just type in MartiniWorks. It's going to pop right up. We upload every single Friday. We've been doing it now for almost 2 years. It's an incredible podcast. We'd love to have your support over on it. Check it out. Let us know if you like it. We talk about Subarus every once in a while. Now, with that being said, here's what we've got. Breaking it all the way back to the beginning, if you're looking at anywhere between a 2002 to 2005, you're probably looking at an EJ205. This was in the WRX, 227 horsepower. Probably the best sounding exhaust came from the EJ205. Again, my personal opinion. However, there's gonna be issues. There's lots of oil leaks that come from the valve cover and the return lines, along with Subaru's infatuation with using bad rubber and bad plastic for things that expand and contract. There's coolant leaks from the expansion tanks because of the aged rubber. Fuel lines will leak when they're cold on the 2002 to 2003. There's a whole list, or I would almost call it a Bible of things to check if you're looking at anything from a 2002 to 2005. But the only other things I would mention, take a look at that crank pulley, the AC belt tensioner, and anything made of plastic in the engine bay, because if it's old, it's gonna need to get replaced. Subarus run hot, the old ones ran hot, and they use a lot of plastic and rubber. That's why a lot of times they have a tendency to fail. That's why a lot of times you hear about those old ones having boost leaks. So if you're looking to get into something where you can tinker with and you can rebuild, but the rebuild isn't gonna be the flashy stuff, an older Subaru might actually really be for you. They're very fun to work on, and if you take your time with them, they're an absolute treat, because when you start to fix them, there's noticeable changes in how the car feels and drives, which I think is super fun. There's nothing worse than doing a bunch of stuff to a car and barely noticing a difference. If you can get it cleaned up right, they're so much fun. Now, you are gonna see a lot of people in the classifieds, if you're trying to buy one, that will mention the engine was rebuilt, or sometimes that it was swapped. This is where the mess of the Subaru community can really start to get wild, because people will brag about swapping in a JDM EJ205 into their USDM EJ205 Subaru WRX, which you can do. The JDM versions got a form of variable cam timing in their motors that the USDM did not, at least in the early years. So if you are looking to get something like that, or you notice that, you're gonna wanna make sure that they actually did the full swap, which includes the wiring work to make that VCT work. Otherwise, that JDM car's the JDM engine in the USDM car is just not gonna run right. And a tune's not gonna fix it. A lot of times there's this blanket thing that gets put on Subaru classifieds. It just needs a tune. Understanding what year, what you're buying, and what you're looking to get into, the tune may not actually be a fix. It may just be a cover, a disguise, a lie, if you will. So anyway, if you go into like 2006 to 2014, you're starting to look at the EJ255. Now, EJ's powered most Subarus up from the 90s up to the FA. As you got newer and newer versions of Subarus, the EJ just as a whole gets less and less competitive in the market. That's why they switched over to the FA, because the EJs were just, what they could squeeze out of them was starting to get smaller and smaller, which is a lot of times the biggest complaint people had about Subaru from when they first launched the WRX to now, especially with the STI. The power changes over the 20 some years of it being live are actually very, very small. And that's because at the beginning of the WRX era in the US, it was huge. The numbers that you could get out of this thing were impressive, but that's because they were already coming from the factory at the top of the threshold. As they started to throw more power into them, they started to break. As the car got newer and newer and newer, the jumps that Subaru could make with the WRX were smaller and smaller, whereas other car manufacturers that were investing in newer technology and newer engine blocks were able to take bigger and bigger and bigger steps. And that's why you see this kind of changing of the guard, especially with Subaru motors and people talking about how incredible they are. Now, the EJ255 suffers from some similar issues too. Some things to keep in mind: the intercooler end tanks are still plastic. The oil filters that are built in that are connected to your turbo will clog at times and can starve your turbo. Cracks in the oil pickup lines are iconic. You do get ringland failure. That's like not a normal thing, but it is a thing that happens. Pistons will crack, the world will end. This seems to happen in cylinder 4. There's a whole almost like rumor that the reason that there's this ringland failure and heating issue and kind of like pistons cracking is because of the way that they design the unequal length headers. Now, this is not fact. This is just good old drama. That cylinders 1 and 3 and 2 and 4, because of the way that they're set up and because of the exhaust gas temperatures, they get read at different times and at different distances away from that O2 sensor, which are vastly different temps when you consider the distance. Because of that, they think that the ECUs can constantly trying to regulate how much fuel and air needs to go into these cylinders, causing this to happen. And that is what they think causes the failure. I'm not sure if that's true. In all honesty, I don't think Subaru would ever let a motor go out like that. That would cause that issue. But then again, who knows? I'm not an engineer. If you go into the 2015 to 2021, you start jumping into this FA20 or FA24 if you have a 22 plus. You got a 2-liter direct injection. I've heard that they're actually great stock, but as you start to add power, it can start to get issues with the connecting rods. Now, newer Subaru WRXs, you're gonna hear people talking about how they had engine failure, and they're gonna say, oh, it's all the same. A lot of turbocharged cars, especially newer ones, suffer from this issue where you can't necessarily just smash the throttle. You have to lean into the throttle, especially on turbocharged applications, because of the way the tune is working to deal with emission issues. This is super common right now. I don't know what's going on with this. Subaru was kind of just the first one to suffer from it, but I'm sure there are others out there as well. Essentially what happened, and this is one of the biggest reasons why Subaru is sometimes deemed unreliable. When Subaru was coming into the States, when the WRX was in its heyday, there was an OEM tune that was applied to some of these motors that I mentioned that had almost like an Achilles heel built into it, a problem from the get-go, which was to meet emission standards for what they were bringing in, they had to develop the ECU in a way that ran almost too lean when you were getting on the throttle, giving you better gas mileage, reducing emissions. The problem with that is that the motor was essentially creating its own rod knot from factory, with a factory car, factory parts, factory everything, just to get a little bit better gas mileage. If you take that issue and you expand it over 80,000 miles or 100,000 miles, or then you further expand that on the fact that somebody buys it, maybe they put an intake on it, maybe they put an exhaust on it, but they don't retune it, you start to exaggerate this issue. And this is where you start to hear a lot of these Subaru experts, people that are way smarter than me, talking about engine rebuilding and talking about how people don't understand what they're getting into because Subaru from factory has some of these weird dispositions, these weird little things that you have to keep in mind. So if you're wondering why a lot of them are deemed unreliable, unreliable, it's because that threshold of running lean on the EJ205s has caused these engines to already get to the point of potentially breaking. Somebody buys it, they throw a tune on it, they try to make 300 horsepower, it's all stock. Next thing you know, engine blows up. Now, the 05 to 06 Saab 92X is actually identical to the Subaru Impreza. This was actually at a time where GM owned a chunk of Subaru at the time, and they wanted to bring in a car under the Saab name in a station wagon configuration. So if you want to have something saucy and different, you can have a 9.2. It's not, you're not going to get the same amount of love. They call it a Subaru. Thought that was kind of fun. Saabs are cool cars. That's maybe a different video. You'll let us know what car you want us to talk about next as well. But wheel fitments. Let's get into some of the good stuff. If you are looking to modify a WRX, you want to just do something that's an accessory thing, maybe not so much the motor. You have a 2015 or newer, 18.9.5 plus 38 with a 245/40 tire, golden. Fortunato coilovers or BC Racing coilovers for all of this. The newer stuff, Fortunatos do so well on this platform. I don't know how to explain it, but they've just, Fortune nailed it with the 510 series or even 500 series on the 215 or the 2015 to present Subaru. They just did. If you have a 2008 to 2014, it's going to be pretty much the same thing. 18 by 9.5. We've mostly seen plus 35 with a 245/40 tire. If you have a 2002 to 2007, the diameter of the wheel goes down just because it looks a little bit better because the car just has older body lines. 17 by 8 plus 35 on a 225/40 or 215/40 if you want. If you want a little beefier setup, you can do a 245/40 and make it look big, I guess. If you have a GC, that'd be 1992 to 2000. 16 by 8 plus 40 with a 215/50 looks pretty good. That's gonna be like your Enkis. Pretty much as you get into that older stuff, especially the 16-inch diameter, you're left with Enki if you want a good-looking wheel. Now, BBS LMs obviously are banging. Graham lights look really cool on the older stuff. And the newer cars, I've seen Advan R2s look wicked good. I've seen Stage Knights look wicked good if you're on a budget. The Kansei Astros look insane on this if you're putting air suspension 3P on it and you want to do more of like a bag setup. You can do a 215/35 on a 9.5 on air suspension. You are going to remove the entire purpose of having a all-wheel drive rally car, but at the end of the day, we just want our cars to be cool as hell, and I think that looks cool as hell. How do you start modifying them if you're going past wheels and tires? Super easy. I'm gonna look me in the eyes. Look at me in my big blue eyes. Start with your maintenance first. Please. You can have your own opinions about cars. I have my own opinions about cars, like Hyundai and Kia, and I will never shut up about it. It's just a thing. Now, that doesn't mean that they're bad, but it's good to have a good baseline before you base your opinion on something, which is why experience matters. It's why we started MartiniWorks, because the experience of selling wheels, tires, and suspension and performance parts means we've been able to tell you the truth about stuff without feeling like there's some person over our head that's angry because we're gonna impact margin or sell less because we're telling people the truth. Subarus, you need to do the maintenance first. It has to be done. It has to be done well. It has to be done within thresholds, and you still have to understand that even after you do all of that, you are taking a car that's already up here in threshold and modifying it. The second thing, do your key issues first. There are key issues in every single generation of Subaru WRX that you're gonna need to keep in mind. Things like the ringland failures, things like the heating issues and the clamps and the hoses and the turbos getting oil. These are all very common things. Baffled oil pans, you're gonna hear that so often with this, that you're gonna wanna make sure your coolant stays cool, your oil stays flowing, and your parts stay in one piece. Over time, they crack, they fail. You need to make sure you're starting with some good stuff. Now, this is very weird to say, but you're gonna wanna batch a couple of these car parts together. If you're playing with the intake and you're playing with the exhaust, you're gonna be playing with the tune. Do not put one on the first and then the second and then the third. Try to batch up a little bit, especially on the tune side, because a tune, especially on the older EJs, fix that lean out issue that I mentioned earlier. But a lot of times if you do that and then you get an intake and an exhaust, you're gonna need to get it reflashed anyway. So a lot of times, package it all together. Exhaust and headers, if you have a 2022 or newer, the Tomei full titanium muffler exhaust sounds really good. It's really affordable. If you had an 08 to 14, the NVIDIA titanium tip catback exhaust is an absolute banger exhaust that I've heard people love. If you have an 08 to 11 EJ25 turbo exhaust manifold from HKS, super awesome. And then of course, like I said before, coilovers, Fortunato. The biggest thing to keep in mind about this entire car is that Subaru WRXs have a very tight tolerance. So you're gonna have to keep that in mind. To be good at this car, you gotta be patient, you gotta be smart, and you gotta be listening to learn a lot. But the Subaru WRX is still a bang-on platform. And if you think I missed something, let me know in the comments below. If you're looking for car parts for your Subaru WRX, mod your car at MartiniWorks.com. Let me know if you learned something as well. We'd love to keep doing this video series, so we need to know what car we should talk about next. I'm Alex. We'll see you on the next one. Adios.